Well, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to session 3 of the AMBA BGA Festival of Excellence. Session 3 is on strategic business school partnerships. And shortly, I'll hand over to Steve van der Velde, Professor of Operations and Management at the Rotterdam School of Management and Chair of AMBA's International Accreditation Advisory Board, to chair the session and introduce the rest of the panelists. But before I do that, just to remind you, we want this session to be as interactive as possible. You'll see a Q&A panel at the bottom, so please feel free to pop in any questions or thoughts for the panel in there, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can before the end of the session. But we do have a fantastic panel for you today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Steve to start the conversation.
Thank you very much, David, and welcome to everyone tuning in. Indeed, this topic, the topic about corporate partnerships, is a very crucial one for business schools for very obvious reason. It's clear that many of our faculty would have personal relationships with executives, with corporations, and so on, for maybe research or for maybe teaching or case writing, right? But very often as a business school, you would like to institutionalize them for the longer term, but also you want to have those relationships maybe for recruitment, for internships, for big projects, for selling your executive education, for many different purposes. So very often our expectations, and by our I mean the expectations from business schools, are clear, right? But what about the expectations from our counterparts, from corporations? And that's why we are having this panel with 3 very knowledgeable executives. And I would like to ask them to introduce themselves. I would say ladies first. So Ralitza, would you mind going first?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ralitza Jordanova. A quick introduction about myself. I started my career in marketing. I've always been a marketer. I started on the corporate side of things, working for brands such as BMW, Kellogg's, BlackBerry back in the days. Shortly after that, I made a transition over into the entrepreneur side of things and actually had the opportunity to run a startup marketing and advertising agency for 3 years, which was a great experience. And then after that, I moved back into corporate and I joined Accor Hotels. Needless to say, I absolutely fell in love with the hospitality industry, and I've been there for the last almost 6 years. And today I oversee the global partnership strategy for our luxury and premium brands. So that represents 12 different brands and just over 600 hotels globally. And very happy to be here today to speak to all of you.
Thank you, Ralitza. Antonio,
Sure. I'm Antonio Schub. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at Telefónica. The telecoms operator that's active in both Europe and all over South America. And we serve 348 million customers in our markets. Over the past 10 years, myself and my team have built up a network of strategic partners with other telecom operators, which we call the Telefónica Partners Program. That has now 68 countries, serving a total of 1.9 billion customers worldwide. By the way, this Brazilian accent, what you're listening, although I'm based in Madrid, Spain.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jet.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And my name is John Tarkoff. I'm also go by the moniker Jet. I am the Chief Customer Strategy and Transformation Officer at a small but ever-growing company called Blue Prism. We were the originators of the fastest growing tech segment right now called robotic process automation. And we were the ones that developed the first platform in that 20 plus years ago, and is now considered the fastest growing segment in that particular automation area. In my career, I started out always in the area around optimization work, operational excellence, and I've worked for organizations such as GE, was one of the original quality leaders under Jack Welch, and learning and development work has always been a part of my career. I've also been an expat, lived everywhere from Europe, UK, Russia, New Zealand, and now back home in the United States again, because I think we need all the help we can get here as well. So Blue Prism is a digital worker company. We provide software that helps companies create a synergistic workforce between humans and their technology and our digital workers. And Tony, you'll be happy to know that we put a very large, first of its kind synergistic workforce with your big call centers in Spain, and has had a humongous impact on the ability for your contact centers to interact with your customers in a much faster and much more engaging way than what we were doing in the past. So it's great to be here and looking forward to this, David. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. So, like I said, links with practice and engagement with practice is so important for business schools. It's part of your license to operate, right? But we're not just talking about links here with corporations, we're talking about corporate partnerships. So that suggests some reciprocity. So clearly, what I said before, it's clear, I think, from a business school perspective, what corporations can offer to business schools. But what about your perception, your perspective? So what, to your mind, constitutes a beneficial corporate partnership? What would it be about? So, anyone?
Yeah, I love the input that we've already heard from, and I think the only thing I would add is that, from a very, personal perspective, as coming from the technology industry, we already are fully engaged in our UK headquarter area in London with the schools there that provide us apprenticeships and internships, and we're now looking to expand that even more. And what we look for, and when we speak with the schools that we're currently engaged in, it's really important that what we are being able to convey to them is actually taken very seriously, and that because we are actually in the market and working with over 2,000 major organizations that are our customers. So we understand what their needs are going to be. We can see where the trends are coming from. And we believe that, when we're speaking to these institutions and suggesting to them and making recommendations to them that, building in to every student's curriculum, the level and the understanding of these new evolving technologies, and the way that these technologies are just going to be as common as your own mobile device in everyday business life. It really isn't, we really aren't yet seeing that being taken up as much as we would like to see that. And I think, again, it's hard to get away from that. And it's even still that way post our first year now of COVID. And we really do still find that a bit remarkable. And so I think, again, when we look for partnerships, we're looking for those schools, those institutions that we feel an alignment to, because they've recognized that the world is evolving and that this change that is coming about is being pressed on to us at a rate of speed unlike something that we've ever seen before.
So Jed, you said when we are looking for partnerships or looking for business schools, so that seems to suggest that you are proactive in this manner. Is that typically how it goes? You approach business schools, or would you get approached by business schools?
Most of the time, we are seeking, when we make a decision in certain areas of our business, and I'm heavily involved. As a matter of fact, I sponsor 2 of the areas where we do recruit apprenticeships and internships. And so we're the ones that are going out and seeking. And in one instance, we were approached. But we are the ones that oftentimes are looking for internships or looking for the right type of talent. And we'll work with the schools to actually craft the profiles and the type of development programs we want to work with the schools to do. And again, as I said, when we do that, we want to be taken very seriously about that, because we think we have a lot to add because of our 20 years of experience in this field and the amount of customer input we're taking, and we're being able to provide that back to the schools. And through our, the ability to work within our company through these various programs that we're trying to put together.
Yeah. So Jed, in a sense, you're also partly echoing what Antonio said, right? I mean, you're recruiting and you got internships to fill. Antonio, you said you want to have access to MBA students in particular. I don't know if that also applies to you, but how has GDPR changed that particular ball game, right? Because as a school, we're not supposed to give you the names of, say, the 10 best students in class. So is there a difference in the way of working since maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago when this came into effect?
Well, I can start with from Blue Prism's perspective. We're actually now testing out, and I'm just from the way I'll describe it is no-name resumes and things. We're going to that extent. We look at profiles of our candidates, and we're a very, very active organization when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We are very pro in our stance on, all of our efforts in the women in technology efforts. We founded Women in Robotics Society in around the world. So, there's a lot of things that our company alone does. And so when those new regulations came out, for us, it really, we acknowledged it. We knew what we could and couldn't do. But again, it wasn't something that that really set us back that much. Because again, we already had a culture and a heritage of, I guess the only way I would describe it is kind of doing the right thing. And so, we want to be able to abide and work with the schools that also feel the same way. And, we want to look at candidates that fit, and work with the kind of culture that we have as well. So, I'm hand on heart. I wasn't the top of my class either. So I kind of think my parents are okay with where I turned out. So I'm all right with that. And I think, a lot of our employees at our company, they may not have been at the top of their classes either. And some of them absolutely are too, but that's what makes the world go round and makes a great ecosystem of talent within, because we all have different skill sets and the strengths come out, not necessarily in the way that they may be scoring in their scholastic endeavors.
So let's say, what's the process that you are typically using for exploring and setting up, developing a partnership?
Yeah, so for us, a number of different ways. It's interesting that you say, because looking back at my experience on the corporate side, for the most part, from an organizational standpoint, we have typically been the ones approaching business schools versus the other way around. And again, for us, I think a couple of key things come into play. The first one is values behind that business school, and looking at, and I think Jet and Antonio, you already mentioned this, but looking at innovation, change, being able to quickly adapt to the current marketplace. And perfect example, if you look at the current COVID context, we are in a situation where you have an excess of global talent available in the marketplace that is desperate for work, that is looking to work. And I speak for the hospitality industry specifically. If I look at our workforce, upwards of 70% of people have either been furloughed, laid off, on temp leave, a number of different scenarios. So you have this gap of what we'll have now for maybe a year, 2 years, where you'll have this talent sitting in the marketplace, not necessarily engaged. No one is hiring. It's extremely difficult. The big opportunity that I see is how, both from an organization standpoint and for schools now, what programming or what outreach can we put in place to ensure that 2 years from now, when the rebound happens, that talent wants to come back to the organization. So in our case, that hospitality talent comes back to Accor versus going to one of our competitors like Marriott, like IHG, et cetera. So I think that, looking at the approach, so there's obviously other areas that come into play, geography, rankings, et cetera. But I think it's really looking at the level of collaboration that the business school wants to come to the table with to co-create new programming, new kind of innovation together to attract talent, and then to, of course, develop existing talent. Especially when it comes to, ideally we should be doing this on an ongoing basis. It shouldn't take a crisis to kind of get us in shape for that. But yeah, I think for me, it's really what kind of a mindset the leaders behind that business school come to the table with, and how they're willing to shape and work with organizations to really make something impactful beyond your typical access to talent, beyond interviews, beyond apprenticeships and databases.
So John said, Jet said, we're working with a couple of schools in the area. And Ralitza, you also mentioned geography, and also I wrote down proximity. So in London, you got great business schools. In Paris, you got great business schools. In Antonio, in Madrid as well, right? So is proximity an important factor in forging partnerships, or would you go and look to schools maybe beyond, I don't know what kind of radius, 200 kilometers or 300 kilometers? So to what extent does proximity play a role?
I think proximity, physical proximity is a factor, probably less so now because many people are working from home. Yeah. But having physical access to professors and students help a lot in many ways. For instance, going back to your previous point regarding GDPR. Yes, we need to be GDPR compliant. But first is the law. Second is important. It's a legitimate concern. But there are ways that we can get privileged access to talent simply by having better visibility, getting more brand awareness by having executives attending as guests class discussions, having an executive presenting a case directly to the students and interacting with them, listening to the questions and being to identify who has more glint in their eye. Or likewise, lots of us at Telefonica, we join panels for assessing startups' business plans. That many schools could have that as part of the curriculum. A group of students create a business case and it needs to be presented for assessment. Having a guy from Telefonica in those panels both helps to create awareness for Telefonica as a potential future employer, and also allows us to have early access to people who are very motivated, very driven, and probably quite smart. Consulting projects is also something that some schools do from abroad. We had people here from Alliance, from Manchester, but it was a very short assignment simply because for practical reasons. Having people who are already in Madrid is far easier.
Yeah. So I would like to talk also about exclusivity, right? I guess from a business school perspective, a partnership suggests some degree, some level of exclusivity, like Antonio, you're Telefonica, right? And I would expect, or I would hope that you would say, okay, my school, that's the school I do business with, and no other school in the area. I don't think it would work that way, does it?
Right now, it doesn't. We do have partnerships, not major strategic ones. We have about 20-something, 22, if I recall correctly, sponsor chairs at universities in Spain. Most of them, and virtually all of them, are all telecommunications engineering, not business. And we do have agreements with the local business schools mainly, i.e. IESE and ESADE. And in other markets with different investors, like in Brazil, we have also similar agreements. But they're not strategic relations, and as far as I know this. Again, I'm basically leading strategic partnerships with other telcos, not with business schools. But to the best of my knowledge, we have dealings, very open, very transparent, very productive dealings, but not exclusive relationships like you're implying. Yeah. You're asking.
And Alice, how does it work? Does it work the other way around? Like you expect a business school not to have any partnership with a competitor of yours?
No, to be very transparent with you, over the last couple of years, we've moved away from that idea of exclusivity. I think that having an open marketplace where there's different ideas, different collaborations happening, just involves everybody that's involved in that. So we've moved away from exclusivity when it comes to business school partnerships, even when it comes to some of our key strategic partnerships. We tend to go in with an open approach.
Okay. John, I mean, in your business, it's slightly different. I mean, it's not, you don't have that many direct clear competitors, probably.
Well, we do, and from our product standpoint, it's growing. When we started the business, there was one. Then there were two major ones, and in the last probably 3 years, everybody's jumped on the robotic process automation wagon because of the industry predictions in the market, and it continues to grow. So even the big name players now, the SAPs and Oracles now are claiming they can do RPA. So everybody's moving into this space because it's an easier technology to help you automate with. And so, yes, we do have, but, and from the school standpoint, we're very much like my colleagues here. We have looked at certain areas where we would do some exclusive things with. A lot of, though, I will tell you, we also reciprocate. So I'll give you an example. I work with MIT here in the United States, and I also work with Carnegie Mellon. And I personally actually work with their business school at Carnegie Mellon on a program that we've introduced with them through one of our partners that who helps deliver our product out to the market. And they actually are working with me to teach business students about how to use our product. And so MIT now is interested in doing the same kind of thing. And so we're thinking about whether or not does that actually dilute the relationship that we have with Carnegie Mellon. Both very fine institutions. So, we don't have an exclusivity from working with any school as far as when we're trying to get the work from an internship perspective and those types of things. But we are actually thinking a little bit more about, how broad do we want to spread ourselves when we're delivering the curriculum in, around the world at the highest levels of academia. So that is one of the things that we're looking at. There's pros and cons for doing that from a market breadth perspective, but we also are sensitive to the universities as well.
So my next question is, to what extent you're typically formalizing the partnership? So Antonio, you referred to you sponsoring 20 chairs, right? So I imagine that there is quite some money involved then, right? So most likely you would have a contract, but otherwise, how would you codify it? I mean, would you have a formal contract, or would you sign a memorandum of understanding? How does it work? Or is it just a tacit agreement that you have? How does it work?
We have everything. It's the thing about being a big company is that you have all the possible variety, all the different models, and all the possible exceptions as well. But in the case of that, those sponsor chairs, that is actually regulated by law in Spain. almost all of those universities are public universities, and there is a specific law that regulates that. And we just follow the law, actually. And so there's a standard contract in front, and there are limits on the funding that we can provide and the things we can do. And to be frank, it's something that is particularly important from the public policy point of view. It shows our commitment to development of telecommunications in this country, which is the domestic market and the home market of Telefonica, but it's not necessarily the whole picture. I can complement with a view from the other type of relationship they have with other telecom operators around the world. For those partnerships, which are strategic, we have super detailed contracts, and we probably spend more time talking with lawyers
exactly
than talking business in the end, and it's extremely important because although I'm not particularly a fan of lawyers, that would be a great moment to quote Shakespeare that first kill all the lawyers, but not going to do it because they may sound harsh. But the point is that it does help to align expectations. And you have something that requires to be clear, that it's very hard to write a good contract that is not clear on the expected outcomes and the commitments. Yeah. And we follow those contracts to the letter.
Let's say you're nodding. Is this, that also happens?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, similarly to Antonio, in a massive organization, we do have a few different scenarios, but I would say at a minimum, we always have a letter of intent in place. And again, there is varying degrees of what that looks like. The other area that we've really started pushing towards, and I think this is again going back to our way of defining it as a strategic partnership, is a minimum length of the contract. So for us right now, that today is 3 years. So that engagement needs to be for a minimum of 3 years for us to, again, ensure that both parties are coming to the table with the same level of expectations and intent for what that partnership and collaboration will develop into. Whereas in the past, we would have had a lot more, I would say, one-offs or short-term agreements. But again, moving forward, it's really minimum letter of intent, minimum 3 years collaboration.
Right. So now, suppose you signed a contract or a letter of intent or a memorandum of understanding, right, for the next 3 years. And then ideally, you should monitor whether or not you meet the expectations, right? I mean, the mutual expectations. So who, to your mind, should be the owner of the contract or of the partnership? Any advice or any recommendations how to handle this?
Yeah, I mean, I think both parties should be owners. And in fact, there should be a committee developed from multiple stakeholders within the organization. So whether that's talent and culture, whether that's the actual hiring managers, and then a number of key stakeholders from the business schools, there should be an ongoing check-in sessions to ensure that there is a two-way communication, just because, I mean, personally, on our side, we have rotating interns that come in, every 6 months into a core, and quite large groups. We have almost 300 interns come on in every 6 months. And it's been really interesting for me to see, when we talk about what are the expectations of an organization from a business school, but also, I think for us, we need to rephrase that and as an organization, to start asking more for feedback from the schools as well, because it's really interesting to see new up and coming emerging talent. And, even in the last 2 years, their expectations of what a work culture should look like, what kind of flexibility they should have, what kind of autonomy they should have, what they should be working on, not working on, has really evolved. And I think, some of it is just due to the nature of different generations, et cetera. But it's been interesting, and it's been a little bit of a challenge for us, especially being the huge organization that we are. To adapt work culture that quickly is always difficult. There's a lot of red tape, a lot of status quo. So I think a big opportunity for us as organizations is to be taking counsel from business schools on a more regular and ongoing basis, and having that 360 feedback to really understand, not only how can we improve the work assignments itself, but I think work culture and environment, especially again, if we look at what the new world post-COVID will look like, it's going to be completely different of what work culture expectations are. So another area for us to consider.
Okay. So, and Jed and Antonio, so Ralitza, you said that you're using a committee to monitor, evaluate the relationship or the partnership. Are you doing the same, or is it actually tied to one particular person?
Well, for us, it usually comes down to the organization, which is, again, we're a small company. So there's usually myself, who sits on the executive committee, one of my managers who is the one that's looking after these kinds of relationships, that will, between he and I, will make the determination if there's something that's above my signatory authority, then I'll take that to my boss, the CEO and chairman, and or if it requires an executive committee decision, then that's pretty straightforward as well. So it's pretty streamlined. It doesn't normally involve, unless we have multiple stakeholders who are utilizing the resources that we're bringing into the company. And then there's always going to be involved those other stakeholders, as Rita talked about as well. So we're acting as the conduit. Unless my organization is utilizing those resources, then again, we have, two says, if you will, or two voices involved, both as the facilitator of the relationships as well as a user of the talent itself. So that's just one quick example of how we would organize it within Blue Prism.
So one of the big dilemmas that a lot of business schools are facing with, and actually my school as well, is whether or not to have what you would call account management, right? So, and at the beginning, I said, if you look at faculty, they also have very often many personal relationships with all sorts of companies. And then from a school perspective, in a sense, you would like to know what everyone is doing, but that's, and bundle it, but that's of course a huge challenge because people are pretty maverick, if I may use the word. So what would be your advice to a business school to try and implement this nonetheless, because you might find it useful? Or would you say, well, whatever happens outside the scope of our corporate partnership, we're not so much interested in, but it's not worth the effort? You understand my question? So to what extent do you really want to know what kind of relationships the business school has with your organization? So for instance, I'm in Rotterdam. Unilever used to be headquartered in Rotterdam. Unfortunately, they left to London, right? But if you would ask me, what are you doing with Unilever? That would take me probably a full week to figure this out, right? Because so many things happen outside the scope of a corporate partnership. What would be your advice to a business school?
If may I think it's important that if you have a strategic relationship, if you have a relationship at a higher level with a broad base aiming to create something relevant for both organizations involved, then you should make an effort to have the full picture. And you need to build organizational procedures in order to capture the information and have that readily available, which is usually not that complex. You just need to identify the usual suspects that need to be consulted, even if informally, in order to gather a view of what's going on. The reason for that is that by having the full picture, you have much more opportunities to act upon, to understand what's going on the other side and to act upon it. And here I can say that I'm talking from experience, because it took a long time for us to structure that Telefónica is a telecommunications company. We do have dealings with other telecoms companies, and we have dealings in dozens of things. We like roaming, international wholesale, joint presence in committees for standardization of technologies. It can be super complex, but once you have a clear picture of multiple activities with another telco that indicate a pattern and an intention, you're in far better position to use that information and do something productive with it.
Although, Antonio, you made one simplifying assumption. In many cases, faculty are not very eager to share the contacts because, you know, the big question would be, what are you going to do with it? So they're afraid that they have to hand over that particular relationship. So
that happens not only with faculty, that happens with managers, with directors. That's human. That's not specifically to business schools, unfortunately.
The salespeople are notorious for that because they believe they own the relationship.
Exactly. So yeah,
made by the company, right?
Yeah. So maybe a final question before we open up for Q&A. Clearly, feedback and input on curricula is also crucial, right? And we all want to offer curricula that are really forward-looking and future-proof and very current. How are you handling this within your companies? Is that also part of the corporate partnerships?
Well, that's just for us, as you can well imagine, as a tech company, that's super important for us. I mean, we are constantly involved. Just giving an example, in India, I have an individual that is full-time in our academia program, because I also run the Blue Prism University and Educational Services, which is our arm for training the users of our products. But we also work with academics outreach type of programs. So we have an individual in India that is working with about 100 and plus different schools. As you probably are all aware, there are the India education system is very different than what we probably know in most locations. And so we actually work with those institutions to embed our curriculum within their systems. And we also work with them to establish hackathons that work within their curriculum as well. And we stage these. The last one, we had 20,000 attendees to a hackathon that then supported where they were in the development life cycle around India for learning software. So again, it's a very interesting approach, but again, it helps provide talent globally for what we are working on, you know, as an organization. So it's very, very important for us. And then as you move up the ladder and you think about the managerial ranks, you know, that's the next stage for us, which is really helping the business schools, which is the next step for us to really, you know, how do you think about the future of work and the future workforce? And it's evolving, you know, it's desperately evolving because of this remote work, the pandemic, so many different vectors have impacted this. And with artificial intelligence, with the products like ours and others, we're going to see this synergistic workforce come to be. And you're going to see more collaboration between humans, digital workers, and technology. And managers who are used to working with humans only aren't going to be as relevant, and they're going to struggle. And so the schools need to be able to teach and give experiences to the new kids coming out with what that world is going to be like. And so that's super, super important to us. And, you know, again, that is something that we are beginning now, and we'll be pressing forward that much more aggressively over the next several years.
So let's say you're in the hospitality industry, right? And then human-to-human contact is so important. I mean, what's your standpoint on this?
Yeah, I mean, going back to feedback, it's critical. So I'll give a quick example of how quickly we're able to work with some of our hospitality schools that we partner with. So as you can imagine, when the crisis hit and we went into lockdown, human-to-human contact, especially in a hotel environment, the key priority became safety of our guests. Sanitary measures were put in place. And that was a massive initiative that had to be rolled out extremely quickly on a global scale. So we actually worked with our hospitality school partners to put together the curriculum of what the new standard for sanitary measures needs to look like. And they're actually the ones to deploy this. So it becomes really critical, again, just being agile and being to really adapt to the needs of the market, because as it's rapidly changing and new needs that we didn't know. For example, if you said 3 years ago, 2 years ago, that sanitary measures were going to be a key curriculum as part of a hospitality program, it was never going to be a priority in our new normal. That is one of the most important things that our teams across the globe need to be certified for. So it's critical to have that relationship, but then also to quickly be able to execute. And I think that's where we're, if you ask what are some of the key things we're looking for, it's the execution and to be able to quickly deploy it out into the market.
Okay. Now, I'm about to open up for questions, but could you please maybe share what you think is the golden nugget for the audience? So what's your tip for building, maintaining, nurturing corporate relationships? And Antonio, can I start with you? What do you think is or what pitfall to avoid?
Sure.
So just one thing.
There was a long list. I've been doing partnerships for too long. I can only think of problems and pitfalls. But the key thing to consider is that if it's a substantial strategic relationship, someone will need to change something. It's not going to be business as usual after the partnership. You need to do some people will need to stop doing things, some people will need to change things, and there is inertia, there is job protection, there are issues around it. And the way to unblock those issues is twofold. First, involve management. If you can involve the higher echelon of the organization, all the better. Second, build trust. And trust, in our case, the only way we actually manage to build trust is to give in a lot first and expecting that perhaps in the future we'll get something back. But in the beginning, you need to invest. You need to put yourself into it. You need to open up your company. You need to give a lot without necessarily a clear perspective of what or when you will be getting back.
Okay, so these were two important lessons, right? At least. And Ralitza, to your mind?
I mean, the list is very, very long, but I would say, and Antonio, you touched on this, setting expectations very early in the process and ensuring that whether that's formalized or not, but ensuring that there's very much an alignment of those expectations. But the other piece, which has worked really well for us, is also getting buy-in at the highest level as quickly as possible. And, there's creative ways to do that. I think there's, obviously have the account managers that manage that ongoing relationship, and there's different checkpoints, et cetera. But as a little tidbit, one of the things that we do as part of our ongoing agreement, we actually make our CEO sit down with the equivalent head of a business school or of an organization. We actually force the two CEOs or heads of to sit down together for a lunch once a year, just so that there's a relationship that's built at that level as well. And then of course, day-to-day relationship is super important as well. So yes, managing expectations right up front and getting that buy-in at the highest level possible.
Okay, good. Jed?
And I think that what Tony and Ralitza had put in there is spot on. I think the only two things I would add is one is that, we would expect and given everything that is going on is practicality. It's very easy for us to be, and even in our world, of course, is to be thinking, 3 and 5 years down the road and come up with grand schemes and conceptual models. And but at the end of the day, we've all learned that what we believed was going to be a one-year plan in 2019 was dramatically changed, and depending upon where you lived in the world, somewhere between January and March. And you could throw all those things out the windows. So what you planned for 2020 didn't exist anymore. And that happened within 90 days. And so again, we have to, what we look for and what we expect is agility to move in that small A. And then whenever you do have, it's got to be practical, which means you've got to take in consideration that we may be throwing it away and we may have to reinvent again because something else may come in to play. And we think, you know, we just had a discussion about this in our company because look what's happened with the new strains of the virus. And we thought we might be seeing the end of the tunnel come summer, but who knows what's going to happen now. We've had to rethink a number of things in certain markets. So I think those two things, the agility and this practicality, is something that is very important to us.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking at the Q&A box, and we also got a question coming in through the chat box, right? I can read out one of those questions, or I can't look at the audience, but ask someone from the audience to speak up. That might be more lively and more interactive. Is there anyone who likes to ask a question? If not, let me read out the question that came in through Q&A. It's from Pauline Parker, and she says, if a school reaches out, what makes you take the next step or ignore it, right? So Jed, you already referred to agility. Maybe Pauline is referring to not only location, but maybe also the standing of the business school or proximity. What kind of factors come into play next to agility? Maybe also brand name, does that play a role? Accreditations, does that play a role? Do they play a role?
Just for us, it would be, you know, the first thing we look at is where is it? Again, we're a small company. We don't have the nature, the capital backing and you know, the nature that Tony has with Telefonica and also Reliz. I mean, we're just not that size. So it's very important for us to be practical too when we look at things, right? And of course, and we've got great schools around London, and you know, our North America headquarters is split between New York City and Austin, Texas, and we've got great schools in both locations. There's no doubt about that as well. So we do look at, you know, the opportunities when we are approached, and you know, again, so it is a very selective process when we are going to decide to work with those schools. But again, it's usually not something that we have a lot of. We are the ones that, again, are normally going out. And I think the reason for that, quite honestly, is, Steve, is that it's because we're small. We're not normally a company that people are going to go running after because we don't have a big brand name yet. That may change in the near future, which we are all hopeful for. But again, we're okay with that.
Okay. So I'm also going to read out this question, which I find particularly interesting. So here we go. Business schools and corporates have worked together in the past in executive education to keep employees up to date with the latest trends. Do you think education suppliers like Coursera are disrupting this relationship? That's a good one. That's our scare to a large extent, I would say, right?
I don't think it's disrupting, but it's certainly affecting. I know lots of people who have taken courses from Coursera, edX, and also from the more the higher end of the spectrum, Get Smarter, this type of thing, Emeritus. Many of those executives are doing that out of their own pocket, and because they believe that they need to complement their skills, that they need to learn new things they are not getting on the job, and it's unlikely that they're going to get either from our corporate university or from a company-sponsored program. So yes, it's a major factor, and it's just like digital is disrupting everything for everyone. Since business schools are not going to be different.
And do you know how to value or validate those credentials? Are you taking it from at face value? So it's Coursera and this is the title, so it's supposed to be okay? Or how does it work within your organizations?
In our case, it's employees can get, the employee will decide, it's not a company policy. It is partially sponsored, so you get some funding for that, but it's not major. And it's up to the employee to do his due diligence on the program he's selecting. Mainly and to the best of my knowledge, people are selecting mainly because of two factors: branding. Harvard online programs are, I know it's quite a few people who are signing up for it. And second, specialization.
We are a good second, I hope, or not?
The Rotterdam School of Management is right at the top. No, but specialization is an important one.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, even though it may not be the most well-known or the highest, best place to rank, best ranked university in the world, but it's quite unknown for something that's important. Digital transformation is a good topic. There are lots of people vying for position in that.
Yeah. And then maybe a final question. Is it more about networks rather than partnerships in the new normal? Clearly, partnerships are bilateral and networks are multilateral. Yeah, and sometimes, and particularly in certain industries, you know, you got companies, although they might be competitors, they might work together for certain purposes, and then actually work together also with the business school. That happens a lot in my area, which is operations and supply chain, where you often see that competitors are actually working together in order to get some scale, or maybe to lobby against governments and so on. How do you see this?
I'll probably take too much time, but there is already an implied network if a company does a partnership with a business school, because many business schools have also deals with other corporates and with other business schools. Many business schools have internationalized, not by establishing a direct presence, but by creating agreements, like for executive MBA programs or things like that. And that is positive. That's something that a business school is bringing to the table in a relationship with a company. It should be highlighted. It should be promoted. But the idea of having a strategic relationship, it implies some type of dedicated resources, and having a network complicates a lot. So it can evolve to that, but probably at a second level.
Yeah, sometimes business schools have centers or research centers around a particular theme, and then they could actually act as a spider in the web, bringing different companies together around that particular theme, right? So then that also would be about networking to a large extent. Okay. Looking and conscious about time, it's 2 minutes to, right? So I believe that I got to give the floor back to David. I would like to thank you, the three of you, Lalitza, Jed, Antonio. Many thanks for, I think, a very insightful and hopefully also a very instructive conversation. At least I picked up a lot, and hopefully the audience as well. David, back to you.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you. That was a fantastic, incredible panel. I took a lot from it as well. And I can see by the number of comments and questions that everybody who is listening did as well. So thank you, Steve, for chairing. Thank you, Antonio, Relitza, and Jet for taking part in the conversation. I also really want to take the opportunity to once again thank Blue Prism, as with all the sessions, for your incredible support in helping us build this event, and also for being our headline sponsor. So many thank you for that. It makes such a difference to us in delivering thought leadership. Just to remind everyone else, the next session will be tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. GMT, when we will be talking about leading change at business schools and inspiring lifelong learning. You should have all received an email with a link to join the session. Just make sure you click the link for session 4, because you might have received some other ones as well. I think that's all from us for this afternoon, but thank you once again to Blue Prism, to all our panelists, Antonio, Relitza, Jet, and our chair, Steve, and goodbye.